All right. Hello and welcome everybody to the Fit Pro Show. This is David here. We have Emily on today and we have Phil Beedle with us. He's a ergonomics specialist today, so he's got lots of great tips for us. If you are on the computer, you'll be able to see some of the information that he has presented here. If you aren't, we're going to be off camera as far as our videos go, and we're going to do that every once in a while just to promote everybody kind of moving a little bit, so you can take this on your phone and take a walk or anything like that. So that's just a first note for us, but welcome, Phil. Thanks for joining. And I want to first just talk about what ergonomics is, maybe just give a little definition, and then we can go into anything you want to hit on.
Absolutely, and thanks for inviting me. I think this will be fun. The working definition of ergonomics is that it's fitting the task and the tools to the person. So the opposite phrase is not a true phrase. It's not the person fitting herself or himself to the tasks or the tools. So it's about, does the person have the capability to perform the work, and does the workstation or the tools that they use actually fit them, and are they fit for the purpose for the work being done? So from an office perspective, I really think about this from a posture more than anything else. And so I've got a image up on the screen looking at zones or work zones. We look at primary zone, we look at the secondary zone, and the things that folks touch the most frequently should reside within that primary work zone. So it avoids awkward kinds of and sustained kinds of reaches, which I know that in the past few sessions you've been talking a lot about spine health. This really relates to that, because as we extend our extremities, then we're contracting musculature at the core to basically support that. And that's not always on a prolonged basis, that's not necessarily the best, offering the best biomechanical advantage. So keeping things in nice and close is really the reason for that, is to improve that biomechanical advantage. So this looks at it from above, from a side viewpoint. We want to have those tools right here in this green ideal zone. So if we then kind of break that a little bit more, looking at both seated and standing work, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, that these are kind of the ideal, or what I think of the ideal positions, so that you can achieve this very nice balanced posture. And again, I'm going to focus on spine. And if we look at this from the head down, we can see that on both of these illustrations, this guy's head is pretty well balanced right over his shoulders. So the weight of his head is being supported primarily by the vertebrae of the cervical spine or the neck, not so much muscle contraction. And then upper arms, shoulders are relaxed, upper arms are hanging loosely at the sides. Again, that affords that biomechanical advantage. And then ears, shoulders, elbows, hips are in a fairly well vertical alignment. And that's going to help promote and sustain that nice S curve. David, I know you spoke about that. I don't know if it was the last session or not, which one it was, but you were speaking about that S curve. This helps to promote and sustain that normal, healthy S curve in the spine.
So it's not certain segments that are overloaded, right?
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. Now, if you were to think about this guy, and let's just take the seated one, if his keyboard were further away from him, so he's reaching out, that's going to change the load, particularly in that thoracic region, that mid-back region, and change that curvature of the thoracic spine. So we want to have that in nice and close. We also want the height of this support for keyboard and mouse to be in a position so that the shoulders are not shrugged. Again, if you're shrugging your shoulders on a persistent basis, that's going to change those curvatures of the spine. So we want those shoulders to be nice and relaxed. And so what I'd like to do is just talk folks through how would you determine if your work surface is at the correct height, whether you're seated or you're standing. So if you'll humor me for just a moment, for those on the call who are seated, what I'd like for you all to do is make sure that you're all the way back in your chair with your back supported with the backrest of the chair. Unless you have a chair with armrests that force your shoulders into a shrug position. And if that's the case, then what I want you to do is scoot forward and kind of perch closer to the front edge of the chair. Not so far that you make the chair tip, but what I want you to be able to do is avoid touching the armrests of the chair. If they're adjustable armrests and you can lower them and get them out of the way, that's ideal. For folks who may be standing and maybe walking around, if you're walking around, I want you to stop for just a moment and stay standing. And then the beginning point of all of this is if you're seated, just rest your hands down on your lap and sit up nice and straight. If you're standing, let your arms hang at your sides and stand up nice and straight. The first step then is to gently shrug your shoulders toward your ears. As you shrug, gently roll those shoulders back, squeeze your shoulder blades toward your spine, and now relax. And as you relax, your shoulders should drop into that nice, neutral, balanced posture. And something to keep in mind is where your shoulders go, your head tends to follow. So I'll kind of digress just a moment. If you're reaching forward to keyboard and mouse, it's going to tend to pull your head forward as well. So keeping those shoulders back and in that more neutral position helps not only that thoracic region of your spine, but also the cervical region because your head's balanced over your shoulders. So again, I want you all to do that motion that I just described one more time. Shrug your shoulders, roll them back, relax. Then the next step is just lift your hands up, bending your elbows to 90 degrees so that you're going to be looking in terms of postural perspective, pretty similar to these illustrations, except I want you to be in a palms up position. Should be sitting or standing there, looking as though you're waiting for somebody to put a pile of cash in each hand. Then the next step, so shoulders relaxed, upper arms hanging loosely at your sides, elbows at approximately 90 degrees, slowly and gently rotate your forearms, going from a palms up position to a palms down position. So you're going to be basically flipping your hands over. Once you're in that palms down position, I want you to extend your fingers straight out so that your fingers, your palms, your wrists, and your forearms are all parallel to the floor. And now, without changing the position of the elbow joints or the position of your wrists, let your fingers relax. And as you do that, your fingertips should just generally curl down and either be pointing toward your lap if you're seated or toward the floor if you're standing. And where you are at that fingertip hover position, that's where you would want the top of the keys of your keyboard to be and the height of the mouse to be. Now, if that doesn't match for you, think about how can you change that? Can you change it by adjusting the height of the chair, the height of the work surface to achieve that? But what you're doing then is allowing those shoulders to remain relaxed and not changing that thoracic spine curvature. Then the next piece of it is monitor. And we can see in these illustrations that the top of the screen is at approximately eye level. I really try to get a little more detailed with that and say the top of your visual tasks. So if you're not looking at the top of the monitor itself very much, then that should not be your focal point. It's whatever you're looking at. So if you're looking down in this region, you want to bring that up so that that's at about eye level. But again, the whole idea is you want to keep your head balanced over your shoulders, not tipping your head back to look up, nor if you can avoid it, dropping your chin to look down. They also want to take into account the visual distance to the monitor. Most, if not all of you have heard the rule of thumb, your monitor should be an arm's length away. Well, that's a good rule of thumb as a starting point, but our arm lengths are different and may not match our visual acuity. So the way I approach this is position your monitor or monitor array, if you have more than one, as far away as you can physically do that and still have it clearly visible. If you put it so far away you can't see it and you start leaning in or pushing your head forward, we've defeated the purpose. But by having it as far away as you can physically position it and still clearly see it, it will change or reduce the acuity of the angles of your lines of sight. So it minimizes head neck motion. And this is an example of very prominent forward head position. And David, thank you for allowing me to use this image of you.
No, I don't have a more flattering image, so this is perfect. Beautiful.
Hey,
It paints the picture.
It's beautiful. I'm telling you, it's beautiful. This is what I mean by forward head posture. And what I look at when I'm evaluating this is, where is the ear in relationship to the shoulder? And we want that to be as vertical as possible, not what David was demonstrating here in that previous video. Now, it's not often that I see forward head posture this prominent. And I know, David, you were trying to illustrate that. But what's happening here, David's head, when it was in this position, was being supported more by muscle contraction in his neck, shoulders, and upper back than it was by the vertebrae of the spine, those bony structures of the spine. Work like that for very long, or in that position for very long, that may be problematic. It would be problematic in time. So you want to avoid that. Something else that was mentioned in previous sessions was talking about the vertebrae of the spine as well as then the discs. And it's the articulation of those vertebrae with the intervertebral disc between that allow us mobility. And we need and want mobility. What we want to avoid, though, is getting in these awkward postures for prolonged periods of time. So what I'm not suggesting is that you try to work in a very rigid position and you never deviate from this, because we're meant to move, but you just don't want to be in those awkward positions for prolonged periods of time. And then the final kind of piece with the monitors is, if you have more than one, let's say you have two, think about how you use those monitors. And if one is really more primary than the other, put that primary screen right in front of you with the secondary screen immediately adjacent and angled in a little bit. That'll reduce how much you have to turn your head to look at that screen. Most of the time I see monitors set up like this illustration on the right of the slide, where the common border between the two monitors is directly in front of the person. And that is absolutely appropriate when you're looking at both of those screens fairly fluid and equally. You're back and forth. There's movement involved. You're not holding your head in a rotated position for prolonged periods of time. And that would be something you want to avoid, is that prolonged head rotation.
So Phil, I had a quick question for you, because I did your postural reset that you just talked us through, and I'm sure other people on the call are in a better position now too. We talked about that head and neck and kind of the cascade of events that happens if we're in a bad position. One thing that I find myself doing is I kind of reset from the hip and pelvis area all the way up, but sometimes my legs will be doing different things. Maybe they're out to the side or one's over another or something like that. Is there an optimal position for your lower body as well?
Good question. And let me go back to this. And David, I'm presuming you're talking more from a seated position than a standing?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I'm seated right now, and that's something that I thought about. But certainly when people are standing too, sometimes you will not be activated in some of those main muscles. So a big one that I see and actually do is I'll be like on one leg or one hip, and I'll have one straight, and all my weight will be kind of on one side, because then I don't have to use the musculature. I can kind of use my skeleton there. So that's one when I'm standing, but I kind of like cross my legs sometimes when I'm seated.
Okay, so when you say cross your legs, are you talking about crossing your legs at the knees or crossing your legs at the ankles?
Well, I mean, either will happen, but usually at the ankle, feet area.
Okay, yeah. So if you look at this from a very strict perspective and looking at the anthropometric data and the ergonomics data, it will say 90 degrees at the elbows, 90 degrees at the hips, 90 degrees at the knees, 90 degrees at the ankles. My approach is forget all that 90-degree stuff. It doesn't have to be 90 degrees. In fact, we have a range of joint angles for both the upper and the lower extremities. And the fact that you're crossing your ankles, I think it's harder to cross your legs at the knees if the work surface is of the correct height. Generally, you're not going to have enough leg clearance to do that. But as you're crossing your legs at the ankles, as long as you don't do it for prolonged periods of time, my bias is movement is key. A phrase that I use a lot is your next posture is your best posture. And the basis of that is movement is so critical. changing positions is very, very important. So even though these two illustrations show textbook perfect computing posture, those are statically loaded postures. If you didn't deviate from them, that could be problematic. So David, I'm going to encourage you, squirm, fidget, move around. It's a good thing.
I'm good at that. Okay.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And I think it's good for everybody else to hear too, because we talk about that in exercise or just movement in general too. We usually give examples of people in the best position or executing a movement and it looks perfect, but knowing that there is going to be some differences in how our lower body, our ankles, the mobility and things like that. So I'm glad you said that.
Exactly. And for those folks who have the ability to work from both a seated and a standing position, I encourage you to do that on a frequent and regular basis in terms of making those transitions. Sit-stand desks, just as kind of a general term, are really good in terms of being able to alter your posture on a frequent basis. But just like we know that prolonged static sitting is not the best for us, neither is prolonged static standing. So changing it up, make those changes. In fact, there's some research that suggests that the ideal ratio of sitting and standing work is 20 minutes of seated work, 8 minutes of standing work, and 2 minutes of wandering around, and then you go back to 20 minutes of seated work. I think it's a great research kind of theory. Probably does not very, very practical in the real world, but I think the key takeaway is make those transitions fairly frequent. Don't think, oh, I'm going to stand all morning and then I'm going to sit all afternoon. Do some of each hour if you can manage to do that. If you're on frequent phone calls and you don't have to be looking at your monitor and you can use a wireless headset, I think wireless headsets are one of the best tools around for those of us who work in offices and on computers, because it allows us to wander around. You're not tethered to your desk or PC. I know that's not always practical. Sometimes you're presenting, sometimes you're having to look at content on the computer, but if not, use that opportunity to move about. Again, movement is a key factor here.
I know Emily and I have used that 28-2 rule a lot. And like you said, it's not always the best thing. That every 30 minutes is not going to be like that, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's great to have something to at least think about if that's something that keeps people moving a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's helped me is setting an alarm every 30 minutes, and maybe you can't get it right on the time of that 30 minutes, but it's a good reminder when you're sitting there at your desk, your 30-minute timer goes up, move around, get up, do something. And so that's kind of just a good way to kind of help yourself, kind of remind yourself to move more, like Phil and David have been saying.
And great suggestion, Emily. And I use that as well. Another one that I encourage folks to do is make sure you're well hydrated. Drink plenty of fluid. Biology will help motivate you to make those transitions more frequently.
Yep, definitely.
What an eloquent way to say that.
Yeah, I am a testament to that. I am always drinking a lot of water, so I always got to get up to go to the bathroom.
There you go. So it has benefits in terms of good hydration, as well as it makes you move around more. There was something that Jason Tagley said in a previous session that I wanted to mention, and I've lost what it was about now, so I apologize for that.
I'm here just in case, Phil.
Okay, thanks, Jason. What did you say the last session?
Oh man, was it motion is lotion?
That might have been it. Good information though, and it's. I think we're all kind of on the same page that movement is so important in everything that we do.
And it's hard to remember one great thing that Jason says, because there's so many good little tidbits in here.
So I wanted to just kind of show folks a few stretches, and I just chose 3 that really focus on the 3 primary segments of the spine. starting at the top with the neck, particularly if you find yourself kind of in that forward head posture. It's what I call turtlenecking. This just basically reverses the posture, and perform this on a fairly regular basis. If you're up and moving around, take a few seconds, and it literally is just touching your chin with your fingertips. And that's only as kind of a biofeedback method, but just gently glide your chin back to give some stretch along the neck. Do that for several times. The next one is a scapular retraction, really to focus on that thoracic region. It literally is standing with your feet about shoulder width apart and pull your elbows back. Squeeze those shoulder blades toward your spine. You can even use that posture reset that I talked about a few minutes ago. It's do your shoulder shrug, shoulder squeeze, relax motion. Part of that really is training your brain and your musculature to recognize this is the neutral balance posture. Doing it repetitively helps to ingrain that. It's muscle memory. And if you remember me saying just a few minutes ago, where your shoulders go, your head tends to follow. So if you keep those shoulders back in a more of a balanced, neutral posture, and I'm not talking about squeezing your shoulder blades in a static fashion, that you just bring them back to balance the shoulders, it's going to help to assure your head is more balanced over your shoulders. And one of the analogies I like to make about head, neck, shoulder position is our heads weigh similarly to what a bowling ball is. And if you were to imagine holding a bowling ball in the palm of one of your hands and extending your arm out, it's not going to take long for that shoulder to fatigue. Same kind of thing happens when our heads are in that forward position, like we saw in David's photo. The musculature in the neck, shoulders, and upper back are going to fatigue. And so keeping your head more balanced over your shoulders, let your skeleton, David, you mentioned this with the standing, you're letting your skeleton bear that weight.
Exactly. Yeah. And the retraction that you just went over right there is one of my favorite exercises. I would note this because when I teach that one, many times people also elevate their shoulders when they're trying to kind of search for that retraction. So just a little reminder, when you do that scapular retraction and you're trying to squeeze those scapulas, those shoulder blades together, make sure that those shoulders stay down instead of elevate. So think just down and back. Really good thing to remember.
Right. And use a mirror.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then the last one is for the lumbar spine. We spend so much time in trunk flexion. So if you think, I think oftentimes we don't think of it in this way, but if I go back to here, in this seated position, in a sense, that's trunk flexion. We're at about 90 degrees there at the hips. So a way to reverse that is literally reverse that. Just going to put your hands on your hips and you're going to lean back. And it should be a very gentle stretch, should not be painful, but just to help give all that musculature a reset and a rebalance. So that's all I have for the pictures. And now we can just talk if there are other questions or comments.
Yeah, that's perfect. So if anybody has any questions, just you can speak up or put it in the chat box. One note on the back extension, it's a good point because we're just in this flexion all day, especially at the hip, the spine. So making sure that we kind of counteract that a little bit with some back extension. It can be as simple as this. It doesn't have to be loaded hip hinges like we do in classes, things like that. If you have, you know, a little 20-30 second break, it's a great exercise.
Hey, Phil, I got a question for you.
Yes.
So I try to stay active and mobile, all that sort of thing. This is actually very informational. I appreciate the presentation. One thing I'm curious about is like the prolonged sitting or maybe bad posture. What are some of the actual consequences of that over, you know, the course of 10, 20 years or so? I mean, are there, I understand the strain on the muscles, but are there, what exactly is the risk? Is it just like, is it sore? What sort of pain? Is it arthritis? What sort of
You know,
consequences
I
does
think
that
it
lead
could
to?
be a plethora of things, but and I'll just use, because of your questions, sitting, there can tend to be muscle shortening in some areas because you're in a persistent hip flexed position. And then, and Jason, I remembered what you had mentioned on the previous one, talking about, and I love that you said this, you were talking about sitting disease. And to this question, I think it's very similar. First of all, I would say sitting is not a disease. Sitting is a posture. Prolonged sitting can lead to negative health consequences. So we know that it can lead to an increase in blood pressure, an increase in cholesterol, kind of that metabolic syndrome. And it's probably not just the sitting as much as it's the inactivity. Also, when you're sitting, if you're, think about what you're sitting on, over time, think about your chair, the cushioning in that chair is going to degrade. So chairs have a certain lifetime. So if you're sitting for 10, 15 years, if you're in the same chair for that 10 to 15 years, you may develop some discomfort, not because of necessarily any anatomical changes, but because you just don't have any cushioning left in the chair, or not good cushioning. So those are the kinds of things that kind of pay attention to. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I appreciate it. And I guess I actually kind of stumbled across one more in the back of my head, and it was related to your graphic showing the proper sitting posture as well as the proper standing posture. But myself, HP was kind enough, they gave us a credit at the beginning of the pandemic for, I think it was either a monitor or a desk chair or something to go into the home office. And
right,
I chose a new desk chair that I've been using over the last, I don't know, 18 months or so, or whatever it's been. And it actually reclines some. So I guess I'm kind of curious, is I guess a slight recline, it does have a headrest. So as far as I can tell, the alignment from the skeletal region would be, proper. But I guess, would that be more in line with I'm assuming it would be a sitting posture. I guess I'm just kind of curious, does that cause any differences? Is that a different posture altogether?
Good question. Yeah, good question. So, and from a couple of different perspectives. One is the anthropometric data, the ergonomics research really says a seated position ideally should be anywhere between about 90 degrees at the hip to about 110 degrees. So a slight reclined position. Now, the more you recline, the more likely you're going to drop your chin to kind of go forward so you can look at that screen.
Okay.
On a short-term basis, probably not an issue. But I also think using the chair when you're in a seated position and reclining, particularly when you don't have to look at the screen. If you're just thinking, or say you're in conversation and you're not up and moving around, reclining in the chair is a great use of that functionality.
Yeah, good question, Cole. That's the first thing I thought too, because I don't think there's anything inherently bad. First, in being in a sitting posture. Second, leaning back. But I think about what that head and neck's doing. What are you looking at? Are you still looking at that monitor in the same place it was, but now you're leaning back? Because then we can get into that bad head posture, that cervical spine, and then all those things kind of work down. So I think it just kind of depends on what you're doing.
Okay. Well, yeah, I appreciate it, guys. That's helpful.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Cole.
I love what Phil said to Cole's first question, to that bad posture over time. It just everything gets tighter and shorter, and in some cases underactive, and that's when all these compensations take place, right? Because our body likes to take the path of least resistance. It's just how it is. And that's where all the injury and the pain and things like that. And if we're trying to actually get a workout in, or if we're trying to get that movement in, it's not going to be in a way that you used to if you are tight and you have those short muscles.
Exactly. I'll also share with you something that a physical therapist I used to work with would say to his patients, and it kind of similar to your next posture is your best posture. I think this is a little more pointed, but what he would say to his patients was 100 bad postures are probably better for you than one good posture. And his point was not that bad posture is an okay thing. It's that if you've got 100 different postures, there's that much variety, and you're making frequent changes, that's probably better for you than being in the perfect posture all of the time.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. Yeah, you can articulate different postures through that spine and things like that.
Exactly. And we're meant to move.
Absolutely.
Hey, Phil,
Okay.
we're at time, but we do have one question, one more from Rachel. What are your thoughts on standing board / pads?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Maybe I can clarify. So for example, I have a standing board. It's made for a stand-up desk, and it's kind of somewhat curved wood base with a semi-hard foam top.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's kind of like on an angle too, right?
Yeah, slightly angled and slightly curved on either side.
I think I probably have to see a picture because I'm just not visualizing it. But my first thought was, is it stable? Or my first question is it stable? If it is unstable, while that can be beneficial in terms of strengthening core, it's also probably there's probably a greater risk for a fall or a trip. So, I look at it not just from the ergonomics, but also kind of a safety thing. So just, is it stable, or is there a greater risk that you could fall as a result of that? And I'm just kind of speaking, off the top of my head, because I just can't visualize what this looks like. But if you wouldn't mind taking a picture and sending it to me, I'd certainly be glad to chat with you offline.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely, Rachel, you could do that.
Okay.
We'll leave Phil's email in the chat box.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Phil, first off, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Some very valuable information. I know I learned a lot every time we have you on a program and now the show. So thank you to you and everyone else who came on. David, thanks for all your input and your help. If you guys have any extra questions, concerns, comments, I just left Phil's email in the chat box. And if you guys need anything from us, feel free to reach out to either of us. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thanks
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Take care. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.